They thought you were breaking. They saw the silence. They saw the distance. They saw the things leaving your life. They saw doors closing. They saw you withdraw. And from the outside, it looked like collapse. It looked like you were losing ground. It looked like you were overwhelmed. It looked like the pressure was too much. Some even whispered, "I knew it." Some assumed you couldn't handle it. Some quietly waited for you to fall apart. But what they were witnessing was not destruction. It was reconstruction. There is a season in every chosen life that resembles failure. A season where momentum slows, where relationships shift, where clarity fades before it sharpens. And if you're honest, even you questioned it. You asked yourself, why is everything changing at once? Why does it feel like support is disappearing? Why am I walking alone right now? Because when divine construction begins, isolation often follows. Not because you are abandoned, but because noise must reduce before foundations are rebuilt. This season didn't announce itself as preparation. It arrived disguised as loss. Maybe you lost connections. Maybe you lost comfort. Maybe you lost momentum. Maybe you lost the version of life you thought was secure. And every loss felt personal. It felt targeted. It felt unfair. But heaven was not targeting you. Heaven was refining you. What looked like pieces falling apart were actually weak structures being removed. You see, when God builds something that must last, He does not patch cracks. He tears down unstable walls. And tearing down is loud. It shakes things. It exposes things. It makes everything look unfinished. And unfinished spaces feel uncomfortable. There were nights you felt uncertain, moments you questioned your strength, times you wondered if you miscalculated something. But your questioning did not mean you were weak. It meant you were human inside transformation. People often misunderstand transformation because they expect it to look powerful. They expect strength to look steady. They expect growth to look confident. But real growth looks messy before it looks magnificent. Real strength feels fragile before it feels solid. And during this season, you felt fragile. Not broken, but stretched. Not destroyed, but pressured, like something inside you was being pulled beyond what it had known. That stretching was intentional, because capacity expands under tension. And heaven was expanding your capacity. There were conversations that ended abruptly. There were dynamics that suddenly felt off. There were spaces where you no longer felt understood. It felt like rejection. But rejection is often redirection, wearing unfamiliar clothing. The truth is, some people could only walk with the previous version of you. And when your internal renovation began, compatibility shifted. They didn't leave because you failed. They left because your frequency changed. And when frequency changes, alignment adjusts. But you didn't see it that way at first. You internalized it. You wondered if you were too much, too distant, too intense, too ambitious, too quiet, too different. And in that self-examination, something powerful was happening. You were shedding dependency on external validation. When the applause fades, identity either collapses or solidifies. And yours was solidifying. You didn't notice it immediately. Because strengthening rarely feels dramatic. It feels subtle. Like endurance increasing without announcement. Like resilience forming quietly. Like tolerance expanding without recognition. While they thought you were shrinking, you were stabilizing. There is something sacred about seasons where visibility decreases. because visibility often feeds ego, but invisibility feeds depth. This was a depth-building season. It was uncomfortable because depth requires excavation, and excavation is disruptive. You cannot dig new foundations without disturbing the ground. And your ground was disturbed. Old beliefs were questioned. Old attachments were tested. Old coping mechanisms stopped working. Even your usual ways of processing emotions shifted. You were becoming more observant, less reactive, more reflective, less impulsive. That shift alone was evidence of strengthening. But from the outside, it just looked like you were quieter. People mistake quiet for weakness. They assume if you're not reacting, you're overwhelmed. They assume if you're not defending yourself, you're defeated. But sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes silence is restructuring. You weren't silent because you had nothing to say. You were silent because you were learning to conserve energy. That conservation was preparation. Because what's coming requires emotional discipline, and discipline forms in hidden seasons. The collapse you thought you were experiencing was actually detachment. Detachment from what drained you. Detachment from what distracted you. Detachment from what limited you. But detachment feels lonely before it feels liberating. You felt that loneliness. You felt that stillness. You felt the unfamiliar quiet where noise used to be. And in that quiet, something profound happened. You began to meet yourself without external interference. You began to see your patterns, your strengths, your blind spots, your resilience, and you realized something quietly powerful. You were not as fragile as you thought. The situations that once would have shattered you didn't. The silence that once would have terrified you didn't. The distance that once would have made you chasey didn't. You stayed, you endured, you breathed through it. That endurance was construction, brick by brick, layer by layer, invisible reinforcement, while others assumed you were weakening. Heaven was reinforcing your emotional infrastructure. Because what you are stepping into next cannot be carried by the version of you that needed constant reassurance. It cannot be handled by the version of you that feared abandonment. It cannot be sustained by the version of you that doubted your strength. So that version had to evolve, not through comfort, through challenge, not through applause, through pressure. Pressure reveals structure. If you were truly weak, this season would have crushed you. But you're still here, still standing, still breathing, still believing, even if quietly. That alone proves something powerful. The season that looked like collapse was actually calibration. Your tolerance for chaos decreased. Your standards increased. Your emotional reactions softened. Your spiritual awareness deepened. You may not feel dramatically different, but you are more grounded, more aware, more self-contained. And self-containment is strength. The world equates strength with loud resilience, but divine strength is quiet endurance. It is choosing not to react. It is choosing not to chase. It is choosing not to collapse under misunderstanding. And you chose those things, even when it hurt, even when no one noticed, even when it felt unfair. That's construction. That's reinforcement. That's hidden strengthening. The collapse narrative was an illusion. It was perspective misalignment. Because when scaffolding surrounds a building, it looks unfinished. But scaffolding means development is happening. And your life has been surrounded by scaffolding. Temporary discomfort. Temporary isolation. temporary uncertainty, not permanent loss. Preparation. And preparation is rarely glamorous. It rarely receives applause. It rarely looks impressive. But it is necessary. They thought you were breaking. But you were being braced. They thought you were overwhelmed. But you were being expanded. They thought you were isolated. But you were being insulated from distraction. And one day soon, when the scaffolding comes down, they will see stability. They will see confidence. They will see calm authority. They will call it sudden growth. But heaven will call it slow construction. This season was not collapse, it was alignment. And you survived it, not by accident, but because you were built for it. And this is only the beginning. What they couldn't see was the construction happening beneath the surface. Because the most important rebuilding never happens where everyone can watch. It happens underground, after the shaking, after the loss, after the silence settles. That's when reinforcement begins. When the noise reduced in your life, something deeper started forming. At first, you thought the stillness meant stagnation. You mistook the pause for delay. But it wasn't delay. It was development. You were being strengthened in ways that didn't produce immediate evidence. And that is the hardest kind of growth to trust. The kind where you don't see results yet. The kind where nothing external changes dramatically. The kind where the transformation is internal, invisible, quiet. This was your hidden construction phase. And hidden construction requires patience. It requires endurance without applause. It requires faith without confirmation. During this phase, something subtle began shifting inside you. Your reactions slowed down. Your emotional triggers lost intensity. Your need to explain yourself started dissolving. Before this season, certain behaviors would have provoked you. Certain misunderstandings would have demanded correction. Certain distances would have triggered anxiety. But now, you paused, you observed, you chose not to engage. That wasn't weakness, that was reinforcement. Reinforcement is not loud, it is structural, and structure is what holds weight. You are being prepared to carry more, not emotionally collapse under it. Because the next level of your life will require stability. It will require emotional maturity. It will require discernment. And discernment is sharpened in silence. There were days you felt unseen. Moments when it felt like no one noticed your effort. Times when you questioned whether staying disciplined was worth it. But discipline built muscle. Every time you chose not to react impulsively, muscle formed. Every time you resisted the urge to chase, muscle formed. Every time you trusted the process instead of panicking, muscle formed. You may not feel dramatically stronger, but your tolerance for chaos has decreased, and that alone is evidence. Before, you might have tolerated inconsistency. Now, it exhausts you. Before, you might have overextended yourself. Now you conserve energy. Before, you might have explained yourself repeatedly. Now, you allow silence to speak. That shift is construction. Heaven was not only removing unstable structures, it was fortifying your internal architecture. Think about it. You are calmer now in situations that once would have shaken you. You think before responding. You observe patterns more quickly. You detach faster from what feels misaligned. That's not emotional coldness. That's clarity. And clarity is a sign of strengthening. This season has been less about external achievement and more about internal calibration. Your identity has been detaching from validation. Your worth has been separating from performance. Your confidence has been growing roots instead of wings. Roots are invisible, but roots determine stability. And heaven has been deepening your roots. Because elevation without roots creates collapse. You asked for growth. But growth requires grounding first. And grounding happens in hidden seasons. You were not meant to expand publicly yet. You were meant to stabilize privately. There's a reason certain opportunities paused. There's a reason certain connections faded. There's a reason certain distractions lost their appeal. You are being repositioned, and repositioning requires stillness. When construction workers reinforce a building, they often strip it back to its frame. It looks bare, unfinished, exposed. That exposure can feel vulnerable. You felt exposed in this season, emotionally raw, spiritually stretched, mentally tired. But exposure is necessary before reinforcement, because weak beams must be identified before they are strengthened. You discovered patterns in yourself that needed healing. You confronted fears you once avoided. You acknowledged attachments that weren't healthy. That confrontation was courage, even if no one applauded it. And courage exercised in private builds unshakable confidence, the kind that doesn't need validation, the kind that doesn't crumble under criticism, the kind that doesn't chase acceptance. You are becoming that steady, that grounded, that internally secure. But security is not formed through comfort. It is formed through endurance. There were moments during this phase when you felt tired, not physically, but emotionally. Tired of explaining, tired of adjusting, tired of overextending. That exhaustion was not weakness. It was your system rejecting what no longer aligned. And when your system rejects misalignment, growth accelerates. You began saying no more often. You began stepping back more quickly. You began trusting your intuition more confidently. That's reinforcement. Because intuition strengthens when distraction decreases. And distraction has been decreasing in your life. Not everything that left was a loss. Some of it was interference. Interference that slowed your clarity. Interference that diluted your focus. Interference that kept you small. Now your focus is sharper. Your awareness is higher. Your standards are clearer. You are no longer available for confusion. And that clarity was built in silence. People might assume you withdrew because you were overwhelmed. But you withdrew because you were recalibrating. Recalibration is not dramatic. It is deliberate. You started choosing peace over proving yourself. Choosing alignment over attachment. Choosing stability over intensity. Intensity feels exciting, but stability sustains longevity, and you are being built for longevity. The next chapter of your life requires emotional endurance, not emotional volatility, and volatility has been purged from your system. You may not even realize how much calmer you've become, how much more observant, how much less reactive, but those subtle changes are evidence. Heaven doesn't waste pain. It transforms it into preparation. Every disappointment you endured quietly expanded your capacity. Every misunderstanding strengthened your self-assurance. Every delay deepened your patience. You are not who you were before this season. You are steadier, more centered, more grounded, and grounded people are difficult to shake. This hidden construction phase has been about strengthening your foundation so deeply that external chaos cannot destabilize you. Because elevation is coming, and elevation without reinforcement creates collapse. But you will not collapse. You have already endured the pressure that would have crushed a weaker version of you. That version no longer exists. The person who needed constant reassurance is evolving. The person who feared being alone is transforming. The person who doubted their strength is awakening. And while others misread your quietness as weakness, it was actually focus. Focus on healing. Focus on growth. Focus on discipline. Focus on alignment. You were not shrinking. You were concentrating your power. And concentrated power is potent. The next time pressure comes, you will handle it differently. The next time distance appears, you will not panic. The next time misunderstanding arises, you will not collapse. Because this hidden construction phase built resilience into your nervous system. It strengthened your emotional tolerance. It stabilized your spiritual footing. And stability is power. They thought you were fading, but you were fortifying. They thought you were retreating, but you were rebuilding. They thought the silence meant weakness, but the silence was reinforcement, and soon what was built quietly will stand publicly. There was a battle happening around you that you didn't even recognize. Not because you were blind, not because you were weak, but because some wars are invisible. While people judged your silence, heaven saw endurance. While they labeled your distance as defeat, God called it protection. While they thought you were losing, spiritual forces were being restrained on your behalf. You must understand something now. Not every delay was human. Not every attack was natural. Not every loss was random. Some of what you experienced was resistance. And resistance only shows up when there is value on the other side. Throughout Scripture, every person chosen for impact faced invisible opposition. Look at Book of Job. From the outside, it looked like tragedy, loss, collapse. But behind the veil, there was a spiritual conversation taking place. Job did not know he was being discussed in heavenly courts. He only felt the pressure. That may have been you. You didn't see the spiritual dimension of what was happening. You only felt the weight. You felt doors closing without explanation. You felt relationships shift without reason. You felt resistance where there should have been ease. And the hardest part, you questioned yourself. But what if it wasn't incompetence? What if it wasn't lack? What if it was warfare? In Book of Daniel, when Daniel prayed, the answer was sent immediately. But the manifestation was delayed. Why? Because there was conflict in the unseen realm. The message was dispatched, but it had to pass through resistance. Do you see what that means? Delay does not equal denial. Silence does not equal absence. Pressure does not equal punishment. Sometimes it equals importance. The enemy does not attack what is ordinary. Resistance does not surround what is insignificant. The intensity you experienced was evidence. Evidence that you carry something disruptive to darkness. That season when everything felt harder than it should have been. When simple things required supernatural strength. That wasn't weakness. That was training under pressure. Heaven was building spiritual muscle. You were learning discernment. You were learning silence. You were learning when to move and when to stand still. And most importantly, you were learning obedience without applause. Many people obey when it benefits them publicly. Few obey when it isolates them privately. But you did, even when you didn't fully understand. And that obedience triggered opposition. Because darkness prefers distraction, but you chose discipline. Darkness prefers noise, but you embraced stillness. Darkness prefers impulsiveness, but you learned patience. And patience is one of the most dangerous spiritual weapons a person can carry, because patience says, I trust what I cannot yet see. That terrifies fear. There were moments when you felt unusually tired, not physically, but spiritually. Moments when discouragement felt heavier than logic could explain. Moments when doubt came in waves. Those weren't random moods. They were pressure points. When a person is approaching breakthrough, the atmosphere tightens. Pressure increases right before release. Think of a seed underground. Before it breaks through the soil, it experiences maximum resistance. That doesn't mean it's dying, it means it's emerging. And you were emerging, even when you thought you were buried. The misunderstanding you endured, protection, the isolation, preparation, the closed doors, redirection. You were being separated from environments that could not carry your next level. Because elevation without separation creates collapse. You cannot step into new authority while holding old attachments. So things fell away, and it hurt. Because sometimes pruning feels like punishment. But pruning is proof of growth. A gardener only trims what is alive, and God only refines what has potential. Your refinement season was not about humiliation. It was about calibration. Your instincts were being sharpened. Your perception was being cleansed. Your discernment was being activated. You began noticing energy shifts. You began sensing intentions. You began withdrawing from chaos. That wasn't you becoming distant. That was you becoming aligned. There is a difference. Alignment requires release. And release requires courage. You had to let go of narratives about yourself. You had to release the need to explain. You had to surrender outcomes. And that surrender strengthened you in ways you didn't realize. Because surrender is not weakness. Surrender is strategic trust. In the Garden of Gethsemane, even Jesus Christ felt pressure before purpose. He prayed under distress. He felt the weight of what was ahead. And yet, surrender became strength. The crushing preceded the calling. The pressure preceded the platform. And that same pattern unfolded in your life. Before elevation came constriction. Before clarity came confusion. Before authority came isolation. But now you can look back and see something powerful. You survived what was meant to silence you. You endured what was meant to exhaust you. You matured through what was meant to distract you. That was not accidental resilience. That was divine fortification. When heaven fortifies a person, it does not always look glorious. It looks hidden, quiet, slow, but unshakable. You are not who you were. Your reactions changed. Your tolerance shifted. Your standards elevated. And that didn't happen because life was easy. It happened because life was refining. The fire did not consume you. It clarified you. Gold does not fear fire, because fire reveals authenticity. Your fire season revealed authenticity. It stripped performance. It stripped people pleasing. It stripped dependency on approval. And what remained? Conviction, strength, clarity. That is why the next season will look different. Because you are different. The warfare you endured sharpened your awareness. Now you move slower. You speak less. You observe more. And that is not fear. That is wisdom. The enemy prefers you impulsive. But discipline makes you dangerous. In the unseen realm, something shifted when you refused to quit. When you kept showing up. When you kept praying. When you kept believing quietly. You may not have felt powerful, but perseverance is power, and heaven records endurance. There were assignments that expired because you outlasted them, attacks that weakened because you didn't react, storms that passed because you didn't panic. You thought you were barely surviving, but spiritually you were standing, and standing is victory. There is a verse in Book of Ephesians that speaks about putting on spiritual armor. Armor implies battle, but it also implies survival. You were armored in ways you didn't even recognize. Sometimes protection feels like restriction. Sometimes guidance feels like delay. Sometimes favor feels like isolation. But later it all makes sense. You were not abandoned. You were shielded. You were not rejected. You were redirected. You were not overlooked. You were being positioned. And positioning requires pressure. The next time you question why something was difficult, ask yourself, what was it strengthening? Because difficulty always builds something. Patience, humility, discernment, endurance. All of those are foundations for authority. Authority without humility corrupts. Authority without discernment destroys. Authority without endurance collapses. But you were built properly, slowly, carefully, strategically. And now, the war that once surrounded you cannot intimidate you, because you recognize it. You recognize patterns. You recognize manipulation. You recognize distraction. And recognition removes fear. You are no longer reacting emotionally to every shift. You are observing spiritually. That is growth, and growth cannot be reversed. The hidden war you survived did not break you. It built you. Heaven saw every tear, every silent prayer, every night you felt misunderstood. And those moments were not wasted. They were weight training for destiny. The next chapter will not require the same version of you. It will require this version, the disciplined version, the aware version, the surrendered version, the fortified version. They thought you were falling apart, but heaven knew you were being reinforced. And what is reinforced does not shatter easily. The war you couldn't see. It revealed who you truly are. And now you walk differently, not louder, not arrogant, but grounded. Because when you've survived unseen battles, you don't need public validation. You carry private certainty, and private certainty is unshakable. You are not fragile, you are fortified. You are not delayed. You are aligned. You are not forgotten. You are prepared. And the same pressure that once tried to crush you has now become the evidence that you were chosen to stand. There comes a moment in every hidden season when heaven decides it is time to pull back the veil. For a long time, your growth was invisible. Your prayers were whispered in private. Your tears fell where no one saw them. Your battles were fought in silence. The strengthening was internal, bone deep, spirit deep, character deep. But God never strengthens someone permanently in secret. There is always a reveal season. Section 4 is about that moment, the shift from hidden preparation to visible transformation. Because what God builds in private eventually becomes undeniable in public. The shift you didn't see coming. You may not notice it at first. It's subtle. The anxiety that once controlled you no longer has the same grip. The criticism that once crushed you now rolls off your shoulders. The rejection that once defined you now feels like redirection. Something is different. Not because your circumstances changed overnight, but because you did. The storm that once terrified you now feels familiar. The pressure that once broke you now builds you. The delay that once frustrated you now strengthens your patience. That is the sign. The strengthening worked. While others thought you were barely surviving, heaven was reconfiguring your internal structure. God was reinforcing your foundation so that when elevation came, you would not collapse under the weight of it. Because elevation without endurance is dangerous. Influence without maturity destroys people. Blessing without inner strength overwhelms. God refused to let that happen to you. The confidence that comes from surviving. Real confidence does not come from applause. It comes from surviving what should have broken you. You are not confident now because life is easy. You are confident because you have walked through hard seasons and discovered that you did not fall apart. You learned something powerful. You are more resilient than you thought. The enemy expected your breakdown to be permanent. People expected your failure to define you. Circumstances expected you to quit. But you didn't. And now something inside you knows. If I survive that, I can survive anything. That quiet inner knowing is the evidence of strengthening. It is not loud arrogance. It is calm authority. It is the kind of strength that does not need to announce itself. It simply stands. The promotion that requires pressure. Here is a spiritual truth. God does not promote people based on talent alone. He promotes based on capacity. And capacity is built through pressure. Pressure stretches you. Pressure expands you. Pressure increases what you can carry. When people saw you under pressure, they assumed you were being crushed. But in reality, you were being expanded. Every delay increased your patience. Every betrayal increased your discernment. Every setback increased your wisdom. Every lonely season increased your dependence on God. By the time the door opens, and it will, you will not enter as the same person who started this journey. You will enter fortified, prepared, grounded, unshakable. That is why the delay was necessary. You were not waiting for opportunity. Opportunity was waiting for you to grow into it. The public vindication. There will be a day when those who underestimated you will see the outcome. Not because you need validation, but because God's work cannot stay hidden forever. The same people who whispered about your weakness will witness your stability. The same voices that doubted your calling will see your consistency. The same critics who thought you were falling apart will notice that you are standing stronger than ever. But here is the key. When that day comes, you will not feel the need to prove anything, because the strengthening season removed your insecurity. You no longer need to defend your growth. You no longer need to convince anyone of your value. You no longer need external approval to feel secure. That is how you know you are ready. When the validation finally arrives, and it will not control you. The new authority in your voice. Have you noticed? There is a different tone in your voice now. You speak slower. You speak with clarity. You do not rush to respond to every criticism. You do not feel the need to react emotionally. Why? Because storms trained you. Pain matured you. Silence refined you. When someone has never endured hardship, their words often lack depth. But when someone has survived hidden battles, their voice carries weight. People can sense it. They may not know your full story, but they feel your strength. That authority did not come from success. It came from endurance. The removal of fear. One of the greatest signs that strengthening is complete is this: fear no longer controls your decisions. You used to hesitate. You used to overthink. You used to doubt yourself constantly. But now, you move differently, not recklessly, but boldly. Because you have already faced your worst fears and survived them. When you have already experienced loss, rejection, failure, and disappointment, what else can truly intimidate you? The very things that once terrified you are now part of your testimony. Fear loses its power when exposure becomes experience. God allowed you to walk through what scared you so that it would never own you again. That is strengthening. The unexpected influence. Something else happens in the reveal season. People start watching you, quietly, carefully. They notice how you handle pressure. They observe how you respond to stress. They pay attention to how you treat others after everything you have endured. And without trying to, you become an example. Not because you are perfect, but because you are stable. Stability is rare. Consistency is powerful. Integrity under pressure is magnetic. The very endurance you developed in secret becomes the thing that inspires others publicly. What you survived becomes someone else's blueprint for hope. That is how God multiplies strengthening. He turns survivors into leaders. He turns endurance into influence. He turns pain into platform. The peace that surprises you. One of the most profound outcomes of strengthening is peace. Not the absence of problems, but the absence of panic. You used to panic when things went wrong. Now you pause, you pray, you think clearly, you respond wisely. That peace is not personality. It is transformation. It is the result of walking through storms and discovering that you were never alone in them. Once you truly understand that God sustained you before, you trust that He will sustain you again. Peace replaces panic when trust replaces fear. And trust is built in hidden seasons. The moment of realization. There will be a quiet moment, maybe in the middle of an ordinary day, when it hits you. You are not the same person anymore. The version of you that cried every night. The version of you that doubted your worth. The version of you that felt invisible and fragile. That version is gone, not erased. Transformed, stronger, wiser, grounded. You will realize that what felt like destruction was actually construction. What felt like breaking was actually building. What felt like losing was actually refining. And suddenly, everything makes sense. Not every detail, but the pattern. God was not dismantling your life. He was redesigning you. The gratitude that replaces bitterness. In the reveal season, something unexpected happens. Gratitude replaces resentment. You look back at the betrayal, and instead of anger, you feel growth. You remember the rejection, and instead of shame, you see redirection. You think about the delay, and instead of frustration, you see preparation. That shift is evidence of healing. You no longer wish the season away. You understand it. You see that without the pressure, you would not have this capacity. Without the silence, you would not have this discernment. Without the struggle, you would not have this strength. Gratitude seals the transformation. You were never meant to break. They thought you would collapse. They assumed the weight was too heavy. They predicted your downfall. But what they did not understand was this: you were never meant to break. You were meant to bend and then rise stronger. God does not waste pain. He converts it. He takes what was meant to destroy you and uses it to define your endurance. He takes what was meant to weaken you and turns it into reinforcement. And now, You are living proof that hidden seasons are not wasted seasons. They are building seasons. They are fortifying seasons. They are preparation seasons. Section 4 is the moment where you recognize the strengthening worked. You did not just survive, you were constructed, reinforced, elevated internally before you were ever elevated externally. And this reveal season, it is not about proving people wrong. It is about walking confidently in the strength God built in you. Because when heaven builds something, it does not collapse under pressure. It stands, and so do you. There is one final truth you must understand. You were not strengthened just so you could survive. You were strengthened so you could carry something bigger than yourself. Every hidden season leads somewhere. Every delay has direction. Every breaking point has purpose attached to it. And now you are stepping into the final revelation. God was not just preserving you. He was preparing you for assignment. You were being built for weight. Some people ask, why was my process so intense? Why did I have to go through so much? Because lightweight foundations cannot hold heavyweight callings. If the pressure felt extreme, it's because what you are meant to carry requires unusual strength. Influence requires strength. Leadership requires strength. Responsibility requires strength. Visibility requires strength. And most importantly, obedience requires strength. God could not release you prematurely. If He had elevated you before the strengthening, the very blessing you prayed for might have crushed you. So He reinforced you first. The delay was not denial, it was reinforcement. The difference between chosen and ready. Many people are chosen, few are ready. Being chosen is about destiny. Being ready is about development. Destiny is given. Development is built. You always had potential. That was never in question. But potential without preparation is dangerous. That is why your life did not unfold as quickly as you thought it would. God does not rush development. He refines character before He releases calling. He builds humility before He builds influence. He deepens integrity before He expands visibility. Because if the inside cannot sustain the outside, collapse is inevitable. Now you understand why you had to be built this way. Your pain became your training. Everything you went through was training. The betrayal trained you to discern. The rejection trained you not to depend on human approval. The loneliness trained you to seek God first. The delay trained you to trust timing. The failure trained you resilience. The criticism trained you emotional stability. The silence trained you to hear God's voice more clearly. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. You were in training, even when you thought you were just surviving. And now the strength you developed in isolation is becoming the foundation of your impact. You carry authority now. There is something different about you. When you speak about endurance, it is not theory. When you talk about faith, it is not borrowed language. When you encourage others, it is not empty motivation. You carry authority because you lived it. Authority is born in experience. Anyone can quote scripture. Anyone can repeat spiritual language. But only those who have been tested carry weight in their words. The storms gave your voice substance. The battles gave your testimony credibility. The hidden tears gave your encouragement power. That is why you had to go through it. Not to weaken you, to authenticate you. You are a shelter for others now. Here is one of the most beautiful outcomes of strengthening. You become a safe place for others. because you understand pain without judgment. You understand struggle without criticism. You understand doubt without condemnation. People who have never suffered often lack compassion, but those who have endured and healed carry gentleness. Your scars became empathy. Your endurance became wisdom. Your silence became understanding. Now, when someone is breaking, you do not panic. You steady them, because you remember when you were the one who needed steadying. God built you strong so you could help stabilize others. The responsibility of strength. Strength is not for pride. It is for stewardship. Now that you are fortified, you must guard your heart carefully, because strength can become arrogance if you forget the source. Never forget where your endurance came from. It was not just your willpower. It was grace. It was God sustaining you when you could not sustain yourself. Humility protects strength. Gratitude preserves it. Dependence on God keeps it aligned. The purpose season requires maturity, and you now have it. The assignment ahead, you may not see the full picture yet, but doors will begin to open, opportunities will appear, conversations will shift, new responsibilities will find you. Do not shrink back. Do not question whether you are capable. You are not the fragile version of yourself anymore. You are fortified. The very things that once intimidated you are now within your capacity. You can handle what once overwhelmed you. You can manage what once stressed you. You can lead where you once hesitated, because the strengthening season did its work. This is not accidental growth. It is intentional preparation. The enemy miscalculated. The enemy thought pressure would end you. He miscalculated. He did not understand that pressure produces diamonds. He assumed isolation would weaken you. He did not realize isolation would deepen your relationship with God. He believed delay would discourage you. He did not see that delay was increasing your discipline. Every attack backfired. Every obstacle strengthened you. Every attempt to destroy you refined you. What was meant to break you built you. And now the very resilience that developed in hardship is your greatest weapon. You walk differently now. Notice your posture. Notice your mindset. Notice your boundaries. You no longer beg for validation. You no longer chase spaces that do not value you. You no longer overextend to please everyone. Strength brought clarity. You understand your worth. You understand your calling. You understand your limits. And most importantly, you understand your dependence on God. That balance is powerful. Confidence without pride. Strength without harshness. Authority without arrogance. That is maturity. The legacy you will leave. This season is not just about you. The way you endured will impact others long after this chapter ends. Your children will benefit from your resilience. Your community will benefit from your stability. Your relationships will benefit from your growth. Your testimony will encourage strangers you may never even meet. Because when someone hears your story, they will realize it. If they survived that, maybe I can too. Your survival gives permission for others to hope. Your endurance proves that breaking is not the end. Your strengthening becomes someone else's breakthrough. That is legacy. You are ready. If you have been wondering whether you are ready, this is your confirmation. You are ready. Not because life is perfect, not because challenges disappeared, but because you are no longer easily shaken. Storms may still come. Pressure may still rise. Opposition may still speak. But now you know something you did not know before. You can withstand it. You are anchored, rooted, fortified. God did not just protect you from breaking. He transformed you into someone who bends but does not collapse. The full circle moment. Look back. Think about the version of you at the beginning of this journey. The fear, the exhaustion, the uncertainty. Now look at who you are becoming. Stronger, calmer, wiser, clearer. That transformation is not coincidence. It is divine construction. The hidden season was not punishment. It was preparation. The silence was not abandonment. It was alignment. The delay was not rejection. It was reinforcement. And now you stand in the purpose season, not as someone barely holding on, but as someone built to carry more. Final declaration. They thought you would break, but God was building you. They thought you were losing, but God was fortifying you. They thought you were falling apart, but heaven was reinforcing every weak place. And now, you are not just surviving, you are established, grounded, prepared, sent. Walk boldly into what is next, because the strength you carry was crafted intentionally, and what God builds endures.